Attention Span Labs recommends Sword of Cepheus. Hello and welcome to another episode of Attention Span Labs. As always, I'm your host, Michael A. DiBaggio. And today I'm recommending to you the fantasy sword and sorcery role-playing game, The Sword of Cepheus, by Omer Golan Joel, Richard Hazelwood, and Josh Peters. Published by Stella Gamma Publishing, runs about 140 pages. It is based on the open source Cepheus engine, or Cepheus. Actually, I've heard it pronounced both ways. Refers to the Cepheus of the astronomical variety because it's based on the not second edition, I guess you would call it, the Mongoose Traveler. And Traveler, of course, is the OG science fiction role-playing game, or one of them at least. And the Mongoose edition, made by Mongoose Publishing, that's what I mean by that, came out in the, I think, early 2000s, the first edition. Then they kind of OGL'd it. In fact, they did literally OGL it, and they created a system compatibility document and so forth. And that is what the open source Cepheus engine is based on. Now, as I said, it was originally intended for science fiction, but this is, as far as I know, the first fantasy, medieval. It doesn't have to be fantasy, it could be sword and sandal, sword and sorcery, sword and planet. There's a dragon on the cover, obviously blasting a dude, and there's rules for magic and so forth inside. But it needn't be. It could be run as a kind of gritty, non-magic, magic-free, low fantasy kind of, or low or no fantasy, barbarian game. So, as I said, it's traveler-based, so that makes it old school. But what's interesting about this is that it is a definite alternative to the OSR systems, the systems based off of Dungeons and Dragons, whatever edition of Dungeons and Dragons they're based off of. Dungeons and Dragons, of course, is a mixed dice class-based system, and the original Traveler and the Cepheus engine is every roll that you make is on 2d6, and it is a skill-based system, not class-based. Now, being skill-based instead of class-based has, I think, certain definite advantages. It also has disadvantages, and we're going to talk about them in a minute. But the thing to keep in mind is that it's going to you should have different expectations of playing this if you're used to playing Dungeons and Dragons style. So the one thing I will note, though, is that all character creation involves choosing careers, which can kind of be treated like a class, and with only a few tweaks you can have kind of class-specific things like saving throws that it wouldn't be too hard to implement them into the rules. You could change the way the character progression happens as far as character advancement in terms of XP, which is a problem with the system as is. But so we'll discuss that in a bit. But let me talk about some of the advantages that I see in using a skill-based system over class-based system in fantasy role-playing games. One is that there's broader character possibilities. What I mean by that is, if you're playing classic D&D, the thief or some variation of the thief is the only one that can pick locks. The ranger or maybe the druid is the only one that is good at finding their way around in the wilderness. In this you can have, even if you choose like a pirate, they may actually, because of the nature of the character creation, that pirate may be somehow skilled at horseback riding, and he makes a good knight, or a good, he may be very good at frontier survival, so he makes a good hunter. He could make a backup ranger. If you have a shaman, obviously the shaman is most likely to be very good at magic and religious related stuff, but he might also be a good swordsman. And you don't sort of get that you don't really have that option in the classic format of the class-based system, certainly based on the old school stuff. And so that's the, if you don't like that, well, then you won't like that. You won't like this. But I like that because one thing that it allows is you're not your groups are not, they're less dependent on a single character or class to do essential duties. Like if you have one thief in your group and he gets killed and you haven't got a replacement thief left, and you need to pick a lock, or you need to disarm a trap, you're not quite out of luck, but you're at a very, very significant disadvantage, and you have no real way of eliminating that disadvantage unless you hire somebody or you get someone else to play, or another thief wanders on. If your magic user, your sole magic user is killed, no one else can cast spells. Where in this, technically anyone can learn spells. The other thing is that the skill-based system provides more mechanical guidance to the DM for things that are sort of very hastily sketched out, and in my opinion are not crunchy enough to provide real versatility and verisimilitude in the standard D&D. For instance, I'm talking about all the things where like all characters have an X in 6 chance of, say, dislodging a locked door, and maybe that's modified by strength or whatever. Most things are just, you have they have a 2 in 6 chance of getting lost in the woods unless they're a ranger. Then they only have a 1 in 6 chance, and so forth. That, especially when you're relying on a D6, that's not a whole lot of difference, and it's it doesn't allow for an easy way for the DM to consider, like, what if it's a really dense wood? What if it's a trackless swamp versus just being lost in the field? And you sort of have to fudge that. Not fudging in the sense as you're intentionally modifying the roll so that, but I mean you're for a desired outcome, but you're fudging in the sense that you have to kind of on the fly force yourself to come up with what the appropriate modifiers would be to make more of a continuum there. But in sort of Cepheus, however, there's obvious use cases for the skills, like let's use the wilderness navigation example. You would use the recon roll, and you would put someone. The group would presumably put the guy who's best at recon as like the scout or planning out the movement on the map. And if the better he is at it, he has a better bonus to apply to the roll. It's a target number based system. You'd roll 2d6, and you add your skills or whatever bonuses you have based on your stats, and then you try and meet that target number. For the same thing with hunting, it's like, instead of having like a you have to have a random encounter, and that's, you got to find that thing and hunt it and kill it. In this, there's a skill called survival that governs things like foraging and knowing what plants are right to eat. And you may not want to run an encounter for hunting a rabbit or a deer or something, but you would roll that, and the person in charge of that is your hunter. He's in charge of gathering provisions. So that's what I mean, is that it's more obvious how to do certain things outside of the very class-based focused specialties of D&D. But there are disadvantages to that. A lot of them are sort of your perspective. Because of the variety of characters you can have, there's less star power here. With the skill distribution, as I said, you may have you have a knight who's also a good scout, and so or a pirate who knows how to do some magic, and that maybe take the luster out of your dedicated wizard character. But that's more of a matter of perspective than anything else. I don't mind that very much, either in playing or as a DM. There is also less. This makes it less straightforward how to improve a character in the course of a game by gathering XP. There is an XP system in here, and there's basically it turns into points that you buy for skill improvements, but it's much you can run it the same way as collecting, 1 gold is 1 XP, you can use the D&D monster tables, but they don't have that same sort of progression for character classes because there's no classes and therefore there's no levels. It doesn't work that way. You have to buy skills in a certain amount. And really, if there's any part of this game as presented that needs more work and needs to be fleshed out, that's probably it. But it is sort of less obvious, and it recommends giving everybody that played in a session 1 XP, and particular good role play might get an extra XP, or if they did something particularly good, like they killed a big bad or they solved the mystery, the people involved get some XP based on that. And then over time, like you have to use those points then to buy skill levels. All right, so enough of that. You can decide on your own after you give it a try. I really do recommend you give this a try, even if you're skeptical at it, because this, I think, is it's worth doing. It's worth investigating. I think you'll like it. Now, let's talk about the system itself. The system, as he is, just based on the open source Cepheus engine system, and it is. It has a lot of the same skill names from the Traveler games, but some of them are changed. The list is expanded. There's stuff about magic. There's some feats you can add based on your number, like your number of years in service before you start playing. But we'll actually start with that, because that is, I think, the #1 most exciting and coolest thing about this. And when I asked my players if I was looking at writing a new game, which rule set would I use, and they have different opinions on various aspects of it, but everybody agrees. They really like Cepheus because of the character creation. Everybody 100% agrees that that's their favorite character creation system they've ever played. It's a Lifepath character creation system. You don't just roll and get stats and choose a class. Like, it actually tells you what and you age, and as you age and do more terms in service, you get better at a thing. Now, the obvious implication here is that the more turns you spend in character creation, and the older you get, the more skills you accumulate, and also the more wealth you'll accumulate, and therefore the more powerful your character is. Okay? What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that, because it allows you to have a starting mix of characters that are anywhere from, they're brand new greenhorns that just wandered out of the village and wanted to go and fight the wilderness, and they're grizzled 25-year-old warrior veterans, or 25-year veterans in the service, or they're 60-year-old wizards that have a vast esoteric knowledge, and they're all in the same group. That's very different than the default D&D setting where everybody starts out at level 1. Now, the obvious question then is, why wouldn't everybody just keep rolling on? Because you can't. And this is what, if Traveler, it's unfortunate that I think Traveler is known in the role-playing game space today. If it's known for anything, it's known for being able to die in character creation. And yes, you can die in character creation in this. They allow you sort of an easy way out, that you can get maimed and stuff and not quite die, but then you start at that level. But the whole point, people ask, well, why would you, what's the point of dying in character creation? That's stupid. But it's not stupid, because of what I just described to you, that the longer you're in character creation, the more powerful and wealthy your character gets. So there has to be some balancing element. You can, whenever you try for another term, like if you roll for your first term and you survive that term, and you get and you're young and you have the stats that you have, and you can say, well, I'm good, I want to start here. Excuse me. But if you realistically, most people are like, no, I want to try 2 terms, 3 terms, 4, as many terms as I can. The balance to that is that when you're pushing your luck, every term there's a chance you can die. You can have some kind of misadventure. You could be maimed. You can lose a limb. You can go partially blind, and so forth. You can be kidnapped and stolen. And you can lose your accumulated wealth. And also, the older you get, you have to take aging rolls after the age of 30. And this, I think, you start at the age of is it age of 14 or age 16? I don't know, but it's younger than the normal traveler 18. I think it's 14. And by the time you get to the age of 30, you have to start making age rolls, and those rolls get progressively harder. So at a certain point, you age out, and bad things that happen. You can usually don't die at that point, but you start suffering stat loss, right? So again, it's a trade-off. That's why you do that. But this system, everybody I've played with loves it, and I would recommend that you at least try it. And I recommend that because I think you'll find that it produces a lot more details to the character. If you normally in D&D style randomly generating character, you have to build up a concept over time through play, which is good, which should happen, and should still happen in this game. But because there's during the course of character creation, each term, certain events will happen to you. For instance, like I said, you maybe get kidnapped by pirates and sold into slavery. You could make a grudge. You can have a grudge with someone who was one of your thief partners, and you double cross them to steal their money. You get more money for it, but now they become your lifelong enemy. You could, have a sort of a semi-crippling injury. You can, there's all kinds of stuff, and I will run through a character creation example a little bit later on to show you some of this. But it helps you sketch out more of the character, which you need, especially if you're not just starting out at like a level 1. The other system benefits, and I think there's a bunch of them. So let's talk about the magic system. This is a non-Vancian magic system. It is not a system like in D&D where you have a certain number of spell slots and you memorize them the night before, and then as soon as you cast them, you forget them. All right, I'm not gonna crap on that, but I've never liked that system. I've never liked that kind of thing. It's also not a system where you once you know a spell, you automatically cast it. It doesn't work that way. Magic here is much more dangerous. It's much more fickle. It's much more of the sort of from the literary sources that I like, where you're almost crazy to use magic. It can be very powerful, and it can also blow up in your face very easily. Magic here, anybody can learn it. You don't have to be a magical class, although the magical classes like, say, a shaman or a priest or something like that, at least guarantees you some level of the sorcery skill. You need the sorcery skill to have a reasonable chance of attempting these things, and a sorcery skill to even like read a scroll or something like that. So having that, you need to actually succeed in the roll. Now, if you don't succeed in the roll, if you fail by only a small amount, okay, it just doesn't work. If you fail by a very large amount, or you roll snake eyes, something very bad happens. You can roll, basically have to roll again, and if you fail it again at any level, not just like by four or more, or you don't have to roll snake eyes, you just have to fail it again, then you immediately have a spell mishap. And the spell mishap, there's a table that can happen there, and like the spell can be cast on you and the wrong person. It could cause, there's a whole mutation table, there's like demonic attack table, there's all kinds of bad things. It's like a D66 table. And all kinds of terrible things can happen to you based on that. And perhaps sometimes, sometimes it'll destroy your knowledge of the spell. We had a character who started growing extremely grotesquely long nails. We had a character whose blood started boiling and caused such significant damage that she lost her hand. And you can be attacked by a demon, you can be incinerated, all kinds of things. And some of them are quite fun. And I, as a DM, always like when someone rolls on the spell effects table, on the mutation table, or the misadventure table. The other thing to keep in mind with this magic system, however, magic is not something you cast in combat. It requires much more thought and planning. And this is also a trope I like in magic. Shouldn't be about, oh, bam, I cast there is a way you use it in combat, and that's basically you have to prepare ahead of time, do a ritual to enchant an item. Those items are called foci, and only certain items can be foci, and they cost money, and you have to try and get them. And in my Supernatural Ice Age game that I run, a lot of it involves hunting large and dangerous game, taking their teeth or their heart or something like that, or finding rare crystals and imbuing these foci with the magic power that you then in combat activate. But in order to charge them, you have to do the spell and you risk all the problems I said before. But you would do that before, and you have a selection on hand, and it's sort of limited by the limitation of the foci themselves and how many you were able to enchant. But with the exception of someone that has the feat called Battle Mage, you basically, it's not impossible to do them in combat, it's just extremely hard. First of all, every spell takes, unless there's basically no spell that you can cast that doesn't take less than 10 minutes to cast. And you will need absolute, like a lot of combats aren't going to last 10 minutes, and you absolutely need concentration. You can't be hurt, you can't be punched in the face, you can't be slashed with a sword, you can't be trying to run from the monsters. That will ruin it, and that will actually cause you to roll on the spell table. So something to think about. It's a more cerebral and much more dangerous invocation magic. Magic is not something that can be industrially applied in this game. The third thing I really like about it is it has, just in the book, really excellent, detailed, well spelled out, but also simple chase rules. And chase rules are missing from most games, and that infuriates me because the thing you'll do almost as often, if not more often than combat, is get in a chase. I don't care what game you're playing. You could be playing, a historical, medieval adventure, Dark Ages, Bronze Ages. You could be playing in the far future. You could be, in a supernatural horror, Call of Cthulhu type game. You could be a dungeon crawl. You're going to be chasing people. You're going to be chasing monsters. Are going to be chasing you, and it's not obvious without turning it into like this tedious math game. Who catches up? There is a system. It's like a page long. It's great. I love it. We've used it, and it also incorporates not just chases on foot but vehicles. All right, enough said about that. It's worth it, frankly, for the chase rules alone. The chase rules and the character creation. Another thing I really like about it is that your base stats are basically the same, familiar to D&D. You have your strength, your dexterity, your constitution. Constitution's called endurance in this game. You have your intelligence, wisdom, and so forth. But in place of charisma, you have something called SOC, or your social. It's your social status. SOC covers both the personal magnetism and charm of charisma, the sort of command presence and your ability to inspire people and for people to like you. And it's used a lot of the same way in that, like when you're hiring hirelings, or you're trying to seduce someone, or you're trying to tell a lie, or give a speech to get people to rally around you. It's using the same applications, but social also implies something about your actual social status. So a high SOC usually, but not always, implies that you're a member of the nobility, of the actual titled nobility, or you're maybe there's no such institutions in your game, but you're a person of high repute in your village and so forth, or you're well known and well liked because of your family name or something. And I think that aspect is something that most people don't think about at all, unfortunately, in most modern D&D games, which are played just like they're 21st century America, where basically everybody's a lowborn scumbag and nobody has any respect for anything else, and nobody cares about, nobody even knows where they came from, let alone cares about it. But I think it's essential to emulating pretty much any pre-20th century North American setting that you can ever, or anything that's sort of parallel to that, because your social status, not even if you're like, even if you're playing a Sherlock Holmes game, like your social status is super important in there. It's not even if you're not a member of the nobility, if you're a gentleman or something, right, versus you're some kind of low class peasant, and in that era they're turning into they're having a sort of democratic conversion. They have all the power still in the House of Commons and everything, but it was still super important. Like, people respected the king. People respected, like, if you were duke, it was important. And it's important in this game, but that is essential to emulating anything that's not based on like today, the current year. And frankly, it's the cure for modern D&D 5e's default SJW Burger King Kids Club feel, where everybody's diverse and everybody's low-born, but they can sass off to the local magistrate and nothing happens to them, and they're smarter than the farmer's daughter is smarter than the idiot prince and so forth. So enough said about that. What's another thing? Oh yeah, the combat in this is I like better than D&D. It's very similar. We're the same way. You have hit points, but this combat is arguably more brutal. It's still fast paced. It's easy to do. What I really like about it is that when you suffer, when you're hit, you're very likely to suffer penalties right away. So your number of hit points are determined by you have hit boxes basically. It's a hit point, and the number of hit boxes you have is the combination of your strength, your dexterity, and your endurance scores, your physical stats. So when you get hit, you may still have a bunch of hit points left, but you start taking stat damage. It makes it harder for you to do things, makes it hard for you to react and fight back. Because if you lose enough, you still have most of your hit points left, but you lost your full complement of, say, your constitution, or what's it called, endurance in this game. Then what happens is you're at a -1 to everything you do. If you lose another one, you're at a -2, right? And then if you lose all of them, you're unconscious and you're potentially mortally wounded. You have to do a save against death and so forth. But so those are things I really like, and that's why I think you should give this game a try. It's very affordable. It's familiar, yet different, and the differences I think are almost all positive. The book itself says it's like 140 pages. I think I pay like $20 for it. It's print on demand, and it's also available cheaper in PDF. The PDF is good. If you don't mind having a tablet around. The book includes full bestiary, large spell list, the very fun tables I mentioned before. There's equipment and vehicle tables that detail their cost and weight, and that is extremely helpful, and they're much more extensive than what's in your basic D&D stuff. Of course, it has the character creation system, which let's do that right now. I'll roll up a character in front of you.